Ministers, representatives of the European Commission, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, but above all, dear friends. 20 years ago, 1990 was in many aspects a very particular and very special year. You'll see three people here that you may not necessarily have associated with the dementia movement, but the people that I found are particularly associated with the year 1990. 1990 was the year that Gorbachev received the Nobel Peace Prize. It was the year that Lech Wałęsa, is that the correct pronunciation, was elected as president of Poland. It was also the year that Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and it brought the end to apartheid in South Africa. So a very significant year in many aspects. It really was as if history tried to bring us together and show that 1990 was the year where European countries also came together, because it was really the beginning in many aspects as well of the Cold War in Europe, of a number of countries going to the elections for the very, very first time. So it was in many aspects a year which was, the theme for the year was really bringing people together. It was also the year, and a very important year for our German neighbors, it was the year of German reunification. It was also the year where, under the sea of the English Channel, workers from two countries actually met and built or came through to start the tunnel that was to link the United Kingdom and France. So really, in so many aspects, a year where European peoples came together around shared ideals, a shared vision. It's also the year on a much smaller and on a much more modest scale, but it's also 1990 where three visionaries of the European Alzheimer movement, it's Henk ter Haar from the Netherlands, Michael Coot from Ireland, and Frans Barrow from Belgium, they came up with the idea that it would make sense for European Alzheimer associations to come together, to share experiences, and try and find ways of working together to make sure that the lives of people with dementia and their carers across Europe were improved. At the very first meeting where they met, they adopted a kind of resolution. So for them it was what Lian mentioned, the kind of call of Luxembourg. This was the call of a very small place in the Netherlands. But what they said together was, because we are all satisfied that we will benefit from European cooperation and together can put more pressure on the European Council, Commission, Parliament, and other national and supranational organizations, we have decided to form a European Alzheimer organization. This was, in a way, the birth of Alzheimer Europe, the European Alzheimer organization. And the people that set up the organization from the start thought that political advocacy, changing and influencing policymakers, would have to be one of the key aims of the organization. Today, in our annual general meeting, we also discussed the future strategic plan of the organization, and of course, political advocacy still remains as one of the key priorities of our organization. What I'm hoping to show to you now is that the strategic aims that we have set our organization, and these are the current strategic aims, so promoting information exchange, supporting our member organizations, jointly developing policy and supporting our policies with facts, but also and above all, representing the interests of people with dementia and their carers and making dementia a European priority. These are our current strategic aims, and I'm hoping to be able to show you that in 20 years we have tried to achieve a lot in all of these areas. And I'm also hoping to be able to share with you what some other people that are not directly linked to Alzheimer Europe have said about the organization and how they have valued the work that we have done as a European organization. And the first person that I'm showing you is Françoise Grossetête. She's a member of the European Parliament from France. She's also the president of the European Alzheimer's Alliance. Her wish for Alzheimer Europe was to become the center of coordination and information for Alzheimer organizations and all other organizations involved in this field. So what have we done and how have we tried to achieve this kind of key strategic aim of our organization of improving the information exchange between national associations? The photo that you will see there is actually the very first Alzheimer Europe conference in 1991. You will see that there's quite a number of differences. There's a lot fewer people at the meeting than there's currently today. Also, all the people were in black and white. Today, we're all in color. But on the whole, the kind of key aim of the organization was bringing people together, exchanging experiences, using the kind of conferences that we have today as a kind of key platform to exchange and to learn from one another. And as the kind of former chairperson of Alzheimer Europe always said, to stop reinventing the wheel over and over again. So I really think that what we did in those 20 years ago, or 19 years ago in this kind of case on the first Alzheimer Europe conference, these are all people that were involved in national Alzheimer associations. Around this room, we currently have lots of people that are not necessarily involved in associations. We have people, well, first of all, we have policymakers, we have ministers who are present at this meeting, we have the European Commission who's there, we have people that work in the care sector, we have professionals, we have researchers, we have academics, we have representatives from industry, all here with the same aim, sharing information and experiences. Another area that we have tried to work on, of course, is to have a number of tools at our disposal on how to share the information that we have gathered. And again, at the very beginning, the focus of all our information activities was, well, what have we done as Alzheimer Europe? What have our national organizations done? In the years that have happened since, we really changed the way that we are producing our information. We're not just looking at our own activities, we're not just looking at what our members have done, but of course we're looking at what happens in the field of research, what's happening in the field of policy developments, what are ethical issues that are important to the organization and to people with dementia and their carers. So we really have started developing a special newsletter with all of this information, the Dementia in Europe magazine with a clear focus on policy initiatives. So really showing that Alzheimer's disease is not just an issue for associations, it's a disease, it's a subject that crosses all borders, and it's a question of importance that we are facing this cause together. Again, another objective that we have is supporting our national organizations. This time is Antonio Costa, who is also in this room, who is the director of the Portuguese organization, but he's thankful to the organization for having created a specific climate in Europe where a number of policy changes have become more possible than before. And supporting our member organizations from the beginning has been one of the key priorities of our European organization. When in 1996 we received funding from the European Commission for the first time, the projects that we initiated were clearly dedicated to supporting national member organizations, giving them information materials that they could use, because in a lot of countries, even the barest information about the disease wasn't present. So two big publications that we carried out was, one was the Carers Manual, in which we provide practical tips to carers on how to deal with dementia, how to deal with a person with dementia in the day-to-day occasions. And the other one was the children's book, where we're trying to help children overcome the fact of having a grandmother, a mother, or great-grandaunt, or whoever, somebody in their family who has Alzheimer's disease, and explaining the disease to them. All of these publications are still in circulation, and just this September for World Alzheimer's Day, the French Alzheimer's Organization actually revisited the French Carers Manual, the Guide des Aidants, and it's the third edition of that care manual that has been published. So work that we've done in 1996 with the support of the European Commission is still being used today. But the way that we're supporting our member organizations is no longer by giving them direct information materials that they can use in everyday life. What we're doing is in a more subtle or a more indirect way than we have done in the past. Some of the books that you may be familiar with, and if you're not, they are available at our stand as well. For example, the Dementia in Europe yearbooks. We're looking at specific issues and look at how national countries deal with a specific issue. Be it guardianship systems, be it the fact of driving, what are the laws, how do countries deal with legal capacity or legal incapacity, and basically providing reports that we can send to our countries where they, of course, they know the situation in their country, but what they can learn, hopefully, from these books is, well, in other countries, some of these issues are dealt with in a different way, and for some countries, they're actually dealt with in a better way. So really providing this information to our member organization in the hope that they will be able to learn from the experiences, from the legislation that exists in other countries, and that might be particularly useful for them. What's reassuring for us as a European organization as well is that Back in 1990, we started with 10 members from 9 European countries. We haven't lost any, but we've actually grown as a European family, and we now have 31 member organizations from 28 European countries. So more and more countries have joined us over the time, and it's great to see that most of these countries are also represented at this meeting today. Again, another aspect that I mentioned before, a strategic objective for us as an organization was developing or finding out scientific facts with which we can go to policymakers to say, this is the situation. And Dagmar Roth-Behrendt, she's the Vice President of the European Parliament, she said that patients' organizations should be whistleblowers. So really looking at, well, they should be identifying the shortcomings of the care systems in Europe and mobilize policymakers to bring about effective change. It was in France, in Germany, in Scotland, in France, Germany, Spain, and also Poland. And we asked them how they lived the experience of caring for a person with dementia. And one of the questions we asked, of course, well, what's the time that you spend caring for the person with dementia? We gave no definition of what caring meant, so we left it to the carers to say what they believed caring meant. But it's no surprise to anybody, no expert in the field, well, all experts in the field know that, of course, as the disease severity progresses, the time spent by the carer caring for the person with dementia increases. But what we were quite surprised at was the finding that even in the early stages, 1 in 5 carers, so 20% of carers said that they already spent over 10 hours a day caring for the person with dementia. So 1 in 5 carers mentioned this fact. So the kind of amount of time spent by carers, very often providing care and accompanying the person with dementia free of charge to most social security and health systems, that's a contribution that's very significant. But of course, as the disease severity progresses, this time spent caring for the person also increases, and it's 1 in 2 carers that reported that in the later stages of dementia, they spend at least 10 hours a day caring for their loved one. Another issue that we looked at, and I'm really glad that Leanne, for example, mentioned that she particularly liked the work that Alzheimer Europe has done around the ethical issues of dementia. One of the questions we also asked the countries or the carers in their countries, does the person with dementia actually know that they have dementia? And there were huge and significant differences between European countries. You see that the European average was 64% of the people diagnosed knew of their diagnosis, but the difference between countries was really significant. Only 1 in 4 carers in Spain reported that the person with dementia had been told their diagnosis, whereas 80% of carers said in Scotland, well, the person that we're caring for, of course they know their diagnosis. And this has been, in a way, a basis for us as a European organization to campaign for the right of people with dementia. First of all, if you want their rights to be respected, the first principle for that is that these people then deserve and need to know the fact that they have a diagnosis. Another project that I mentioned was the European collaboration on dementia, and what we were able to do, again with the support of the European Commission, we brought together over 30 experts from over 20 European countries, not just representatives from Alzheimer's associations, but really representatives from very significant institutions such as the Karolinska Institute from Sweden, to name just one, bringing all of these together with an idea of looking at the current state of research in Europe. What we're particularly happy about was that the welcome this project received from the European Commission was very positive, and the then Commissioner for Public Health said that she felt that this was a great health action success, and that the Commission was proud to continue to collaborate with an organization like ours within the framework of the Health Programme 2008-2013. But what was this European collaboration on dementia about? What we tried to achieve was to have a better understanding of how social support systems work in different European countries and what kind of social support people with dementia and their carers receive from national governments. What we also wanted to get a better understanding of is almost every profession, every country has a guideline on how to diagnose and treat dementia. But we very often don't understand what the differences are and how different countries basically find a different scientific solution to exactly the same problems. We also want to get an understanding of what's the prevalence of dementia, what's the cost of dementia, and to get an understanding of, well, what are ways in which we might be able in the future to prevent this disease from happening. I'm not going to go into detail of the 5 work packages, as the European Commission calls that type of work. So I'm not going to tell you everything that the European collaboration on dementia actually found out, but I just want to briefly tell you the findings of this group with regard to the prevalence of dementia. What the researchers actually did was they made an inventory of all prevalence studies that have been published since the Eurodem project. Eurodem was one of the best known and most respected figures that most people quoted when it comes to the prevalence of dementia. It was a meta-analysis of which was done in the early 1990s and looked at the state of the prevalence of dementia in that time. They then developed a number of quality criteria so that only the best studies were actually included in the meta-analysis that the researchers carried out. So out of the 194 articles, only 17 were left that fulfilled all the quality criteria that they found. But what was quite interesting, so this was Eurodem compared to what our researchers from the Eurocode project found. You will see that on this slide when it comes to the prevalence of dementia in men. There's hardly any difference, so the kind of work that had been done by the Eurodem group was very solid, and there was hardly any difference between what they found in the early 1990s and what we found 16 or 17 years later. When it comes to the prevalence of dementia in women, the situation, however, was quite different. What the Eurocode project found was that, unlike what Eurodem had found, that the prevalence of dementia in women increases significantly after the ages of 80. So especially, it doesn't almost plateau and come to an end, but it really continues to increase significantly. And there was a very pronounced difference between, especially the oldest old, women over the age of 95 ultimately have a chance in 2 to have Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And I'm sure that in this case we can't talk about chance, but 1 in 2 women over the age of 95, according to these findings, would be having cognitive problems of significance that would qualify as dementia. So the public health impact, and all the speakers have already mentioned that. We calculated on the basis of these Eurodem or Eurocode figures that there are currently 7.4 million Europeans who have a form of dementia in the European Union. All research shows that these numbers are expected to double or to treble by 2050. And the figure of the iceberg is not to show that the weather here in Luxembourg is particularly bad at this stage, but it's really showing that when we're talking about 7.4 million people affected with Alzheimer's disease, having Alzheimer's disease or form of dementia themselves, we're still only talking about the tip of the iceberg, because behind every person with dementia, there's a partner, there's a carer, there's a family member, there are children, there are grandchildren that are equally affected by this disease. And I think the figures that Mr. Andrzej Ries mentioned, 19 million Europeans who have direct experience of dementia currently in the European Union. Again, this kind of project was very warmly welcomed by a number, first of all, by the European Commission, who has been using these figures since we've published them, but also Philippe Amouyel, who is heading the joint programming initiative that's now going to start with the support again of the European Commission. He felt that the work that they are going to carry out should have to take into account these kind of conclusions of our Eurocode project. The last strategic priority that I mentioned was the fact that as a European organization, we would like to represent the views of people with dementia and their carers, and really the aim that all of us have is to make dementia a European but also a national priority. The Paris Declaration was for many a kind of real start, at least for Alzheimer Europe, because as Alzheimer's associations we came together and we said, well, if we met a policymaker tomorrow, what would we like that policymaker to change in Europe and in their respective countries? This Paris Declaration was adopted at our annual meeting in May 2006, and what we really tried to define was political priorities for us as a European organization with regard to public health, with regard to medical and scientific priorities, care and social issues we addressed in that document, ethical and legal questions, and also Alzheimer, asking policymakers to recognize the important role of Alzheimer associations. If I had to sum up, we had 22 priorities in this document. And again, I'm not going to give you all 22 of them, but if I had to sum up the document, what we wanted to achieve with that document was making dementia a public health priority in Europe and in countries. What we wanted countries to do was to adopt national Alzheimer strategies or dementia strategies. What we wanted countries to do in 2006 was that countries should come together, and instead of each country financing research in their own country and not talking to each other about the research that they're financing, that these countries should come together and exchange information about their respective research programs. And of course, nobody in that room, I think in 2006, would have thought that in the very short time since then, we now have dementia strategies in a number of European countries, Scotland being the latest one that just adopted one, Luxembourg being a country that is working on a dementia strategy, but also with the joint programming initiative of the European Commission and the joint action, it really shows that Europe is now taking this disease much more seriously than they ever have done in the past. And it's not surprising, we went to policymakers, and one of the very first policymakers was Astrid Lulling, member of the European Parliament from Luxembourg, who said to us, well, to me it becomes obvious why you're campaigning and want to make dementia a priority, so I have no hesitation in supporting your Paris Declaration. And it has to be said that in the European Parliament as an organization, we've always had an ally. And again, Antje Ries mentioned that already back in 1996, the European Parliament adopted a first resolution calling upon the European Commission to become active in the field of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. But even before that, in 1994, the European Parliament voted a budget line for specific Alzheimer's projects. And if it hadn't been for these Alzheimer's projects and this specific funding that was set aside by the European Parliament, we would not have been able to establish the Secretariat and carry out all the projects that we have been able to carry out with the funding of the European Commission. But since 2006, since the adoption of our Paris Declaration, we've really been actively campaigning towards members of the European Parliament, asking them to support our cause. And these are just a few photos of the many events we've had in the European Parliament, where we inform members of the European Parliament about our activities, about our concerns, about our priorities. And we have had an open door from members of the European Parliament who have come together and set up a European Alzheimer's Alliance. At the end of the last European Parliament, when it came before the elections, we had over 80 members of the European Parliament supporting this European Alzheimer's Alliance. But what also happened was that in last year, the European Parliament also launched what they call in European Parliament jargon a written declaration. It was launched by 5 members of the European Parliament, Françoise Grossetête from France, John Bowes from the United Kingdom, Katalin Liva from Hungary, Jan Tadeusz Masil from Poland, and Antonis Trakatellis from Greece. This was a campaign that we carried out together with our member organizations, and basically we had to get members of the European Parliament to leave their office, to go to a specific office where this declaration was set, and basically ask them to sign that document. To give you an idea, 90% of written declarations never leave that room and are never adopted. So it's very rare in a way. Only 10% of these written declarations are adopted. And again, in the last term of the European Parliament, this was, I think, the 5th highest written declaration that received the 5th highest signatures from members of the European Parliament. In the end, 465 members of the European Parliament supported this written declaration out of 785, which is close to 60% of members of the European Parliament who shared our conviction, our views that dementia should be made a public health priority. And what did this European Parliament written declaration called for. It called for, well, promoting pan-European research into the causes, prevention, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. It wanted to find ways of improving early diagnosis, simplifying lives and procedures for patients and carers alike, but also very important, it asked for the promotion of the role of Alzheimer's Association and asking for these kind of activities of the European Alzheimer movement and the national organizations to be supported financially. Again, in the words of somebody that's not a member of Alzheimer Europe, but a member of the European Parliament, Brian Crawley, a member from Ireland, he said for the work of the European Alzheimer's Alliance that they had worked tirelessly together with us and national Alzheimer's associations to ensure that dementia is given the priority it deserves as a public health concern, and this hard work has begun to pay off. And I really think, and we already heard, again, André Ries mentioned some of the kind of pointers of how Europe is taking this disease more seriously than they have ever done before. We're now, in my opinion, almost at the stage where we can talk about a European action plan. It received a very strong support during the French presidency of the European Union by none other than the president of the French Republic, by Nicolas Sarkozy, who said that really the fight against Alzheimer's disease should not just be a national priority, but should be a European priority. And both the Council and the Commission worked incredibly fast to, in a way, answer the call from the EU presidency, from the French presidency, but also the call from the European Parliament. And we're now talking about a joint programming initiative and also a joint action. With the joint programming initiative, you will actually have, on the last day of the conference, Philippe Amoyel, who is heading this great initiative, will actually be here, so we'll actually have the opportunity to find out much more about the work that has been carried out. And of course, from our point of view, we as Alzheimer Europe, our national Alzheimer organizations, we are prepared to work with the European Commission on both of these initiatives. We are there to support this kind of initiative. And of course, we're very happy that the European Commission recognizes Alzheimer Europe also as a privileged partner of the organization, and that we are seen as an organization that they are happy to collaborate with. But again, none of the work that has been done would have been possible, and we wouldn't have reached this kind of important stage in the development of our organization if it hadn't been for the support of the various individuals, not just in this room, but in a way it started with the vision of three visionaries who met in 1990 who thought that European collaboration would improve the lives of people with dementia and their carers, would bring about a change in policymakers. But the organization has been very fortunate to have had the support of a very active board of member organizations that work in all different European countries supporting this idea, because as a European organization, we would not be strong enough to defend the interests of people with dementia if it wasn't for the active backing of all these national organizations, the board members. Also, of course, it's a small staff that we have in the organization, but really it's a very dedicated staff. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of them for the work they have done. I would like to thank Annette Dumas. I would like to thank Julie Fraser, Diane Gove, Gladys Guillory, and of course Grazia Tomasini for all the work that they have also put into making a lot of what I've just shown you happen. And finally, there's two people that I would like to single out about all the work that has been done. Again, we're talking about 20 years of Alzheimer Europe. The organization has had 5 chairpersons in those 20 years, but there's particularly 2 chairpersons that I would like to single out, because between them they have led the organization through very specific periods of the organization's history and have really contributed, each one 6 years, to the growth of the organization. The first one, and I think it's been mentioned by everybody that has taken the floor so far, Jean Aucreque, who these days actually is the minister of the economy of this country and has other very weighty problems to discuss, but he was the person that managed to set up the secretariat, to set up the financial planning in place, to set up the organization in this country, and really also started a number of European projects I mentioned the care manual, the children's book. All of these projects were done under his leadership. Also, the development of the first business plan of the organization was done under his leadership. But then the other person that I want to thank as well, of course, is Maurice O'Connell, the person who's sitting here, who for the past 10 years has been a member of the Alzheimer Europe board. He's also, of course, still and continues on the Alzheimer Europe board, but he stepped down today as the chairperson of the organization. And again, he's accompanied the organization through a very particular time. He's been there to make sure that the kind of political advocacy that these visionaries wanted us to talk about and do back in 1990, that this political advocacy wasn't just a priority or a dream, but actually became a reality. And I think we owe both of these gentlemen a huge thank you for the work they've done. So thank you and merci.